freedom's the answer. What's the question? You're listening to Ernest Hancock.
Welcome back to Declare Your Independence with me, Ernest Hancock. My special guest, professor from Kent State, Joshua Stacher. Is that how you say your last name, Professor?
Stacher, yeah.
Stacher? Stacher, you know, this is one thing that I want to try and get your perspective on, studying the Middle East and so on. I would imagine you study the Middle East in general and Arabic cultures and not just Egypt. Am I correct?
Yes, yeah.
And the one thing that I'm looking at is what are the differences and or similarities between the ones that are starting to have this popular uprising. We got Yemen and the Sudan and Somalia and Saudi Arabia and Jordan and Syria, you know, whatever, you know, Libya, I imagine the whole thing's in flux because culturally, Egypt is kind of like the most populous and probably the most popular. Their pop culture and movies and whatever comes from Egypt. So this has got to have an impact on the entire Middle East. And I'm wondering, the other countries there, how's their livestock managed differently, or is it the same?
No, I mean, they're quite different. I mean, you know, if you look at the Arabian Gulf, like where most of the majority of the oil is, you know, they have this sort of system, sort of a caretaker system from the grave, or from the cradle to the grave. So, you know, there's lots of money and people well taken care of. So you don't see the economic depravity that you see in sort of non-oil states. And then, of course, you know, there's this other sort of variable. I mean, the one constant is kind of across all these states are they're highly repressive. And then I think the third variable is whether you are a client state of the United States or not.
And
I
which
think
ones
that really
aren't?
matters.
Well, which ones aren't?
Syria, pretty much Syria, Iran.
Well, this is why. Well, this is why they're always, you know, hey, we gotta go get Iran. You know, got to get Iran, bomb Iran. I mean, and why? Because they're not under our control. That's why, because. So I'm going, okay, well, what else? You know, so then we have, you know, Syria has always been kind of a pain in our butt, and they kind of get a lot used to. I don't know how much they get support from Russia now, but, you know, it's kind of this power play going on. And then, of course, you always got Israel in the mix of everything and the Palestinian issue. So I'm, you know, give me kind of a chess piece, risk, you know, game board of what's going on there. Where is the shifting of power? What role is Israel playing?
Well, Israel is actually not really said too much during the whole Cairo problem. Of course, this is a sort of major ally of Israel in the region too, and it is the biggest Arab state, and they're conscious of that large Arab army to their you know, sort of southwest. However, you know, I mean, so Israel's kind of been sort of largely playing the same kind of role as the sort of U.S. administration.
Secretly backing Mubarak and or military control.
Yes.
Because as far as they're concerned, it's all the same thing. You know, they because then we have you know, what could you give us some history on, you know, Nasser and Sadat and the rise of Mubarak? You got some history to give us on that?
Yeah, I mean, essentially the way that we kind of explain this is it's a tale of two regimes. You have the Gamal Abdel Nasser regime. He's officially in power from 1954 to 1970, and he leads what they call the sort of Arab socialism, but it's not really socialism. It's just state-led development. And the idea was that the state would be the chief engine of growth. The state obviously had sort of capital problems, so they were looking for foreign investment. They were looking for money from abroad. Nasser got into a sort of bidding war with the United States and the Soviet Union. The United States didn't want to back him. Well, they were going to give him money, but he had to like swear allegiance to like everything American. He didn't want to do that, so they wouldn't give him money, so he went with Russia or the Soviet Union. The state eventually exhausts. And when Sadat takes power, he sort of takes the entire system and reorients it. This is what we call the sort of, you know, the second regime. And this is the one that's based on neoliberal economic policies, the IMF, World Bank, and Washington Consensus.
So he joined the club.
And he's the one that, you know, signed up with the Americans. And basically, you know, if a human being can unilaterally sign a peace agreement, he signed a peace agreement unilaterally. And that's always why the peace treaty's always been a source of sort of contention in Egypt. Not because people want to tear it up and go to war. They don't want that. I honestly don't. They've all fought. Everybody has a family in Egypt who's lost members to war. They do not want to go to war. They do not hate Jews. It's not anything like this. But international treaties only work, or they work best when it's dependent on what the people who are underneath that treaty are getting. And so, Hosni Mubarak, he inherited this whole situation in 1981. And the one thing we can say about Hosni Mubarak is...
well, you skipped a little bit there. I mean, you know, we had Sadat was assassinated.
Yeah, he was assassinated because he signed the peace treaty unilaterally, and he utterly pissed off his entire society.
Well, you had, I mean, as I remember,
then he started arresting everybody.
Well, I was in high school at the time or so. You know, I graduated in '79, so it was around that time. And I'm going, you know, there was a parade, a military parade, and all of a sudden, you know, the guys marching in front of them break ranks and start shooting them.
Khalid Islamboli and 3 other people jumped out of a jeep on the Autostrada in Nasser City and shot him. Yeah, he had something like 34 bullets in him. So
Sadat, you know, substantially dead. Well, then what happened immediately following that? How did you know, Mubarak all of a sudden he just said, okay, now I'm in charge?
No, he was the vice president at the time. So what happened is the Speaker of the Parliament took over the country. They had an election. Mubarak won it, and that's the way it's been ever since. He's won, I think, 5 elections or 4 referendums and 1 election.
So are these elections contested, or are they considered to be legitimate?
The last election he had was contested in that it was multi-candidate. The 4 previous ones, he was the only candidate on the ballot. But that said, in the only contested election that he had, he still won 88% of the vote.
Is that, you know, stipulated too, or they thought it might have been rigged a little bit?
Oh, it's rigged.
Yeah, I'm shocked. Okay,
yeah.
So you have an actual contested election that goes through, and people go, you know, we don't. No, he's all of a sudden in the minds of the people, he's not legitimate anymore. You have, so they're going, you know, this democracy thing's not working out. And, you know, inflation starts to hit them. They're going hungry. Then they take to the streets. Well, who's on what side? You know, you talk about the role of the military and the police. Explain that to me. You know, what's the difference?
Well, I mean, they're all taking orders from the same people, right? I mean, there's been this talk about how the police disappeared, right? They got into the fight with the protesters, and all of a sudden the police disappeared, and the jails emptied, right? There was like simultaneous sort of prison breaks, right? And then there were these criminal elements running around town, and then the police came back, and we saw all the violence the other day. Police just don't disappear and reconstitute themselves on their own. That looks like an order, and this looks like a very disciplined regime. And what I'm arguing and what I'm trying to make the case for is that this has been completely regime managed the entire time. They're using one hand of the regime to play arsonist, right? They're using the police to play arsonist, cause a fight, get into a big problem, and they're using the other side of the regime, the military, to solve that problem. So therefore they have the opposition and the protesters surrounded.
Well, when we come back, I want to make sure we get, hopefully, if we can understand the perspective of the people. What are they feeling? How do they see this play out, and what role are they going to have, or do they even have one? We'll talk about that more when we come back with Professor Joshua Stacher in just a little bit.